Well, hello everybody, Chris Sandel here, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm really excited to have you on the call, and thanks so much for showing up live. We're going to cover lots of useful information, and so what I'd suggest is having a pen and paper handy so you can make some notes. I'm going to get you to do an exercise as we go through this, and it's really useful if you can be actually participating and writing down as part of that. So just get a pen and paper handy, or if you've got an iPad or something you can just write on, because you'll really get some benefit out of it. So we're going to start in a sec, but firstly, I just want to make sure you don't have any distractions. I really want you to get the most out of today's webinar. And although I know it can sometimes be hard, can you sort of turn off your phone or put it on to silent, shut down emails and Facebook and Twitter and whatever else that you have open, just so you can be 100% focused. And I promise to sort of make it worth your while, and you'll just get so much more out of it if this is distraction-free. So what are we going to be looking at today? So when people decide that they want to get healthy, normally the first thing they do is to start making changes to their diet. So they focus on the foods that they're eating and what they can do to improve this. So sometimes this is as simple as I want to include more fruits and vegetables, while for other people it can be sort of doing some form of diet that they sort of read in a book or read online. And the other component of this, as you can see on the other side of the slide, is that people typically start to do some exercise. They decide that including exercise is going to be the sort of ticket to get the body they so desperately want. So sort of exercise enters into their life in some form. So maybe it's signing up for the gym, maybe it's signing up to do a sort of 5K or a 10K or a half marathon, or getting a personal trainer who can sort of whip you into shape. And while sort of changes in diet and changes in exercise routine can be helpful for improving health, for a lot of people, it's not the place that they need to start, or at least it's not the only thing they need to start with. In sort of my mind, the biggest determining factor in someone's success in making positive changes to their health that they actually keep up long term is their beliefs and their expectations. Your beliefs have a direct impact on the choices that you make, on the kinds of foods you eat or the diets that you choose to follow, on how you choose to exercise, what you use as a gauge to determine whether what you're doing is working or not, and whether you decide to keep up with your new changes or sort of throw in the towel. And people pay just so little attention to their beliefs and their assumptions about weight, about their body, about food, about self-confidence. And all of these things have just as big an impact, if not more so, than what someone eats or what kind of exercise someone does. And by not addressing these kind of beliefs, people are just sort of consistently setting themselves up for failure. And this is what I want to go through today. I want to look at a lot of the common patterns of thinking that people fall into and how this can sabotage their sort of self-esteem and their ability to follow through. And in essence, this can make it impossible to get to the place that you want to get to. And rather than just sort of dwell on the negatives, I'll show you what you can be doing instead for each of these patterns and why there's sort of so much better ways to deal with the situation. And not everything I'm going to discuss will apply to you. Some of the stuff you'll be like, yeah, this is definitely me. While for others, it's like things you probably have never thought of and just isn't part of your life. But even for the stuff that doesn't apply for you, you should be able to learn from it and sort of help it shape your better practices that I'm going to be suggesting. So before we go any further, I just want to give you a bit of background on myself. My name is Chris Sandel. I'm a nutritionist. I run a company called 7 Health. I'm originally from Sydney, but have been living in the UK for the last 11 years or so. A lot of that time was in London, but sort of more recently have been living out in Kent. And Kent is known as the Garden of England. It's a sort of very green place surrounded by kind of fields and forests and farms. Although it's a pretty miserable place tonight. It's raining very heavily and not very nice outside, but normally it's a very nice place to be. As a nutritionist, I work with clients on a one-to-one basis. I work with them for a period of 5 months and looking at all angles of their life to really improve their health. And diet is a big part of this, but as you'll see as we go through this webinar, diet is really only one piece of the puzzle. And in this whole webinar, I don't give sort of any food suggestions. And despite this, it's still going to be very valuable, because just like when working with clients, there's lots of other areas that need attention. It's not just about food. And so I also give talks, and this can be to businesses who are wanting to improve the health of their employees, or for gyms who are wanting to offer extra stuff for their clients. And I also do lecturing for the School of Natural Therapies. I'm hugely passionate about health and nutrition and lifestyle, and I want people to live sort of happier and healthier lives, but doing it in the sort of easiest, most stress-free way. And from doing this for so many years, I've kind of learned that food can't be the only focal point for improving health, because otherwise you're just really limiting the results you can get. And I take a very sort of big picture approach, and I suggest that you do the same. And it's what I'm going to sort of walk through with you today. So to start off with, I want to share with you a story that will sort of help set the frame for today's webinar. The story is about two experiments done by the psychologist Alex Bevelis, and he studied at MIT in the 1940s before becoming a professor there. He later then moved on to Stanford University, where he carried out the two experiments that I'm going to cover now. So in the first experiment, Bevelis would take two subjects. The subjects were separated so they couldn't see each other's answers or talk to one another as the experiment was running. And he would show the participants a series of pictures of either a healthy cell or a sick cell. And they were given the assignment to learn to distinguish between the two types of cells through trial and error. So with each picture, they'd have to decide whether it was healthy or sick, and they would then indicate this. And then a small light would sort of mark them for right or wrong and provide the feedback so the participants could sort of learn from their respective choices. But the thing was, only one of them received accurate feedback about the guesses. So when the light in person A's cubicle indicated that they'd made a right choice, it was indeed a correct choice. And when they'd made a wrong choice and they were indicated it was wrong, it was also giving them the correct information. On the other hand, the feedback for person B was not based on their own guesses, but was based on the guesses of the other participant. So no matter what the choice, person B was told right if the person A had guessed it right, and was told wrong if person A had guessed it wrong. So data collected at the end of the experiment showed that participant A had learned to distinguish healthy cells from sick cells with a rate of about 80% accuracy. So they'd really started to learn from that information. But with participant B, they continued to guess at no better than a chance rate. And neither of the participants knew this, and this wasn't really the crux of the experiment. It was about the theories that these participants then started to create. So when asked to explain how he made his choices, person A, who'd received sort of accurate, reliable feedback, ended the experiment with a very sort of simple and concrete explanation about how to distinguish between sick and healthy cells. In contrast, person B had developed a very kind of complicated and elaborate theory for how to make the differentiation. This person had no way of knowing the feedback they received was not a true reflection of their responses. And given that they were getting sort of inconsistent and unreliable feedback, this kind of prevented this person B, from making any or learning any real information. But they didn't know any of this, and so they weren't prevented from coming up with theories about what they were seeing. But these results are still not the surprising part. The worrying part of this occurred when both of these participants were able to chat and tell each other their respective theories. And contrary to what one might hope and expect, participant A was impressed with the sort of complicated, mysterious, and unreliable theoretical formulations that participant B had come up with. And person B, on the other hand, dismissed the accurate theory of person A as naive and simplistic. So following on from these chats, each of the participants were then retested. And during this test period, both participants then received accurate information about their guesses. Participant B continued to guess a little better than chance. But participant A, however, who was now attempting to put some of the quote unquote brilliant insights from person B into practice, fared significantly worse. And so whereas before they were getting around about 80% correct, their accuracy headed south in a similar percentage as participant B. So for the second experiment, Bavelas built a machine that produced lights and sounds and programmed it at random. He then asked Stanford students to sit in the machine and figure out what the pattern was that determined how the lights and the sounds would come on. So each student would develop a theory, a sort of set of beliefs about how the machine was worked. He'd then get the participants to explain their theory and what was going on. At the end of the experiment, Bavelas told the students that all their theories were wrong and the machine was actually programmed at random. And the students sort of invariably responded with disbelief. But not only that, the more complex a theory that the student had developed, the more intensely they attempted to refute Bavelas and to insist that their theory was correct and that the machine wasn't programmed randomly, that their theory was actually the right thing. And both of these studies sort of help to demonstrate that there is a basic human need for us to develop beliefs about why things are the way they are. And once these beliefs are developed, it's often very difficult to let them go. And even in the face of sort of overwhelming evidence that what we're doing isn't working or that our beliefs are incorrect, people will sort of vehemently defend them. And this can be taken as sort of a step further when someone's belief switches from being sort of a belief to being a fact. It's one thing to say, hold a belief and understand that it's a theory and that there are other theories out there that may also be true. But when something becomes sort of set in stone and that belief becomes sort of the only one true way in someone's mind, then this is when people really get locked in. And this has a tendency to happen when people are exposed to beliefs and ideas at a young age. So let's look at some sort of rather sobering statistics about what this really looks like. These statistics all come from research studies. They haven't been sort of pulled out of the air despite how alarming some of them may look. And if you're interested in sort of where I got them, you can drop me an email and I'm more than happy to send you or share with you the research. And it's best to remember that these just aren't statistics. These are beliefs that people hold. So the first one is children as young as 5 and 6 years old already express a dislike of obese bodies and perceive being overweight as something negative. As many as 41% of girls aged 7 to 12 years report trying to lose weight. That's 7 to 12-year-olds. 31% of 9-year-old girls are afraid of being fat, and this sort of percentage vaults to a whopping 81% when you get into 10-year-olds. 51% of 9 and 10-year-old girls reported feeling better about themselves when they're on a diet. The fact that 9 and 10-year-old girls are on a diet is worrying, but the fact that 51% say that they feel better on that is even more worrying. And of that number, almost 10% were already reporting sort of purging behavior or attempted purging behavior. And the same levels have been reported in 14-year-old girls. Low self-esteem is seen in 9 to 11-year-olds who believe they're responsible for being overweight, and in those who believe that being overweight jeopardizes their ability for social interactions. It's been shown that sort of 80% of American women are dissatisfied with their appearance. I don't have the statistics for the UK, but I would imagine it's not very different. And 45% of American women are on a diet on any given day. And worryingly, 35% of normal dieters progress to pathological dieting. And of those, 20 to 25% progress to partial or full-blown eating disorders. These are learned behaviors and beliefs about weight and dieting, and they're becoming entrenched in the minds of sort of children at younger and younger ages, and it's having a disastrous effect. They're concepts that people don't grow out of, and these continue to impact people through into adulthood. And when you look at these kind of numbers, it's then no kind of surprise of why people consistently diet in the way that they do, because it's just been ingrained in them that weight is such an important thing and they need to lose weight and being on a diet is so beneficial. And unfortunately, it's just not the case. And often these beliefs, they aren't sort of outright said to children, but they pick up on them from the environment that they're exposed to. I work with many women who sort of have eating disorders. And when I talk to them about it, they normally comment that their mother also had an eating disorder and often that their grandmother had one too. And sadly, they sort of often confess that their daughters are now following in their footsteps. And while occasionally they'll tell me that their sort of mom and dad hated fat people and they made this kind of abundantly clear, this is squarely in the minority. They comment that their mother tried to hide their eating disorder just like they did. But kids are very smart and people need to give them a lot more credit. They sort of notice that mom always cooks dinner but never eats it herself. They notice that she regularly goes on diets and does cleanses. They hear the comments that she makes under her breath about her own body. And even though the mother never hassled them about their weight, they see the worry that she has about her own body and they absorb those beliefs and they make them their own. But this isn't just about people with eating disorders. We've all absorbed beliefs based on the things we hear, the things we're exposed to, our experiences in life, and so forth. And our beliefs are sort of formed in that melting pot of life and typically happens without us even noticing or thinking about it. So don't make the distinction of, or the thinking or the mistake of thinking that this stuff doesn't apply to you because you don't have an eating disorder, because it does. So what I want you to do is I want to do a little exercise with you. And as I suggested at the beginning, I want you to get a piece of paper and a pen just so you can go through it, because you'll get much more out of this if you actually go through this exercise with me now. So I'll give you a sec just to get a piece of paper if you don't have one. So I want you to think about your beliefs in the area of weight. And this exercise can be done for lots of different areas. And I think it's normally quite a useful thing to do when you have a belief that maybe isn't so helpful for you. But for now, I just want to focus on weight. So to start with, get the piece of paper, put a line down the middle so you've got two columns. And on one side, I want you to think about, what does it mean to be thin? So what does someone get because they're thin? What benefits are there? In a sense, like, what is so important about being thin? So even if you can just come up with 2 or 3 or 4 things just for now, just off the top of your head. So it might be that people like you, you get a promotion at work, you'll get a better partner, whatever it may be. And have these be things that you genuinely believe. So next, I want you to do the opposite with sort of being overweight. So what does it mean to be overweight? And you do this in the column next to this. So what does it mean to be overweight? What would happen if you became overweight and obese? Or if you are already overweight or obese, what do you believe happens because of this? What do you miss out on because you're not thin? And do both of these lists as a kind of a real brain dump, just kind of getting all the stuff out of you. Like, don't filter your responses. Don't think, oh God, that's not politically correct. I just want you to kind of, whatever comes to mind, just get that down on paper. And this might be something you do after the webinar as well, when you've got more time, when you don't have me chatting at you. But for now, if you could just get down to the 3 or 4 responses, that would be good. So once you've got this down, what I want you to do is I want to have you to have a look at your responses, and I want you to think about these beliefs. And I want you then to sort of go back as far as you can and to sort of start to think about, where have these beliefs come from? So can you remember a childhood memory of, say, an event that triggered it, or even just an event that might not have triggered it, but just the earliest event you can think of? Was there, say, a particular individual or a group of people that helped create these events, these beliefs? So maybe there was a person at school, maybe there was a relative, maybe there was someone you met when you were at college. And also things like, what currently keeps these beliefs alive? Are there certain things that you do, or are there shows that you watch, or are there things that you read that help to support these beliefs that you have? So now that you have all of this information, there's two things that I want to suggest that you do. So the first relates to the first list that you wrote about sort of weight, sort of being thin and being overweight and what that means. And I want you to look at each of your responses and ask yourself the question, is this true? And so if you've sort of written down sort of being thin will make me happy, ask yourself, is this really true? Are there any people that you can think of who are higher than your ideal weight and are happy? Are there any people that are your ideal weight who are unhappy? And I want you to do this with each of your responses with both the being thin and the being overweight column. And the reason I'm getting you to do this is because it links into your brain. And as complex and as infinitely powerful as your brain is, it's also incredibly simple. Typically, whatever information you feed it with, it will try and find ways to support that information. It will filter your experiences, so it will prove that whatever you are telling it is true. So, for example, if you have a belief that everyone in the world is out to rip you off, this will affect the way that you interact with people. Even if someone is nice, you'll be kind of suspicious and think that it's just a scam and you're kind of just waiting for them to show you their true colors. And then when someone does do wrong by you, it's like, see, I was right. And you kind of then focus on that event. Alternatively, if you say have a belief that everyone deep down is good and the world is a lovely place, you'll have a totally different interaction with people and your environment. When people are nice, it just kind of further supports your theory. When someone does wrong by you, you kind of chalk it up to them being in a tough place temporarily and know that in time they're going to make amends. And I know these are very simple examples, but I'm just wanting to show you that your beliefs and your perceptions affect your experience. And because the thing is, people rarely stop to recognize this. And the stuff that they feed to their brain, they rarely stop to think, is this really true? And this leads people to absorb beliefs basically unconsciously, and having this shape their view of the world and the choices they make. So please go through your list and challenge what you have written. Look at it and ask yourself, is it 100% true? See if you can find examples that run counter to your ideas so you can start to maybe shake the foundations, or at least, or even sort of more so, sort of totally pull them down. And the reason that this is important is you want beliefs that truly support you, that help you to be healthy, that help you to enjoy life, that help you to be sort of confident in your body. A belief system that tells you that you'll only be happy when you lose weight typically doesn't help the situation, and it's definitely not true. In a sense, it tells you that you can't be happy right now because of your current body, and this isn't very supportive. And this doesn't mean you can't want to lose weight. But if you change nothing in your life but losing weight, chances are it's not going to bring you the happiness that you think it will. So I really think that you want to kind of challenge those beliefs and start to look at, are they really true and are they really supporting you? So I want you to now focus on the second part of what you've written down, which is looking at where your beliefs come from. And I'm going to look at this in a sec, but to start with, I just want to share with you another couple of stories. So on the 18th of June, 1971, President Nixon held a press conference in which he declared that drug abuse was enemy number one. This started what is now known as the war on drugs, and it's been going ever since. And part of the impetus for the war on drugs was actually the Vietnam War. And during the Vietnam War, the number of soldiers using opiate products on a regular basis was at a worryingly high amount. In the early stages of the war, marijuana use was fairly common, but from 1969 onwards, heroin and opium became more of an issue. And it was estimated in 1971 that half of US soldiers had tried opiates, and a report from the same year claimed that 15% of the troops were addicted to it. The US government were then concerned when the war ended that there was going to be a steep rise in the number of addicts in America, and these soldiers would then return home and continue with their drug habits. And this fear of addiction was largely based on a lot of experiments that had been done on rats. And there were many different experiments done, but they were all very simple and followed a similar kind of pattern. So let me just give you two of an example. So example one, You put a rat in a cage alone and you provide it with 2 water bottles. One is just water, the other is water laced with heroin or cocaine. As time goes on, the rat will become obsessed with the drug water and keep coming back to it more and more. In example 2, you put an injection apparatus in the back of the rat. You then tether it to a cage so it can't move, and then you provide it with a lever that, if pressed, it's injected with heroin or cocaine. And just like in the first example, the rat will continue to press the lever and therefore prove that drugs are addictive. And the research along with this along with what was going on in the Vietnam War, was really sort of the driving force behind the war on drugs. But was it really correct? So in the 1970s, a professor of psychology in Vancouver called Bruce Alexander decided to do his own experiments. He noticed that rats in the original experiments weren't living in a realistic and a normal way. They were put in cages that were tiny and they were all alone. They had nothing to do but to take drugs. He wanted to see what would happen if he put rats in a different environment. So he built the rat park, and it was over 200 times the floor area of a standard laboratory cage. There were 16 to 20 rats of both sexes in residence. There's an abundance of food, balls, wheels for them to play on, sort of enough space for mating and for raising litters. Think of this as kind of like the Club Med for rats. And so rats who had been forced to consume morphine for up to 57 consecutive days in their tiny little cages were brought to the rat park and released into the new environment. They were given a choice between plain tap water and water laced with morphine. For the most part, they chose the plain water, and they kicked their previous addiction. To quote Professor Alexander, nothing that we tried produced anything that looked like addiction in rats when housed in a reasonably normal environment. And while this experiment was done in the late 1970s, this had already been seen in real life in the early part of that decade. And ironically, the war on drugs was largely created because of the fear of what would happen when the Vietnamese vets returned to the US, when actually what happened is they showed the exact same response as the rat park. The vast majority of Vietnam vets returned home and immediately ceased opium use, and mostly without any noticeable withdrawal symptoms. Obviously, availability played a role in this, but from returning from a high-stress environment like a war zone in a foreign country to a low-stress environment and sort of the jubilation of being home, it eliminated the need for sort of regular drug use and would have kind of created its own high for just being out of that horrible environment. So what does this have to do with your beliefs about food, and why am I telling you this? Well, it's because of the importance of environmental factors. We are largely a product of our environment, and your experience really governs your beliefs. And so this can be the environment or the external environment, like in the case of the Vietnam War, or it can be your external environment like your friends and family. And there is a famous Jim Rohn quote that states, "You are the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with." Who you hang around with has a huge impact on your beliefs. If you're hanging around with people who are very food obsessed, who are always on a diet, then it's going to be much more likely that you're going to take on those belief set and follow in their footsteps. But it's also important to think about your internal environment, and that is the environment that you create in your head. As I mentioned earlier, your perception of the world is largely based on sort of the things that you say to yourself in terms of your beliefs and what you focus on. And like I suggested, that you really should start to challenge your thoughts and your belief. And I think you should be sort of equally aware of your external environment and how this exposes you. What do you read or watch that influences your beliefs about weight or diet or exercise or food? What Facebook groups or blogs or Instagram accounts do you follow that can have an impact on this? If you can change what you're currently and constantly exposing yourself to, you can then change your beliefs. Because to quote Bill Hicks, all your beliefs are just that. They're nothing. They're how you're taught and raised. That doesn't make them real. So let me just show you this in action by looking at tribes around the world. So in Thailand, women wear brass rings around their neck to elongate it. The longer the neck, the sexier the woman. In Ethiopian tribes, they put scars on their belly, and these scars are considered very attractive and very sexy. The women of the Maasai tribe will elongate their earlobes, and again, this is considered very sexy within that tribe. And in Mauritania in Africa, being big and having stretch marks is what is in and is what is most prized in women. And so girls as young as 7 are sent off to fat camps to fatten them up, where they are sort of the equivalent of foie ducks and sort of force-fed food so that they can become big and they can have stretch marks and then they can get married. And I would imagine that all of these things appear sort of strange and unsexy to you. You may even be repulsed at some of them and be thinking, why would people put themselves through this? And the reason is because you haven't grown up in a place that values these things and tells you how important this is. I would imagine that these tribes probably have the same reaction when they find out about the things that we do as a culture because it's highly valued. And this all feeds back into the second part of what I got you to write down. Look at where your beliefs are coming from and what you're constantly doing to support them. If you want to change them, you need to make sure you're sort of exposing yourself to an environment of ideas that can then support these new beliefs and support these new beliefs both internally and externally. In the beginning, this will probably mean that you need to be sort of quite active in that process where you're consciously seeking out things and consciously seeking out different beliefs to then help you out. But as time goes on, it will just become part of the norm and it will become the world that you live in. So the next important thing that affects how you feel about basically all areas of your life is comparing yourself to others. And what is interesting with this is often how inaccurate our comparisons are. And again, let me illustrate this with a story. So Edward Thorndike was an American psychologist. He spent his career looking at educational psychology and the theory of learning. But what I want to share with you is an experiment that he conducted in the 1920s. So he took 2 commanding officers in the army and he asked them to evaluate the soldiers in 2 areas. So the first was their physical qualities. So things like neatness, their voice, their energy. So how they use their physical characteristics to rally the troops. The second was to evaluate their personal characteristics. So things like intellect, leadership skills, loyalty, responsibility, selflessness, cooperation. And what was interesting is that the study showed that there was a correlation between these 2 areas in the assessment by the commanding officers, that the person's physical qualities would impact on the results about their ability with their personal qualities. So if an officer was good or rated good for physical qualities, their rating for personal abilities would also be higher. And if they are rated lower on physical qualities, they were typically deemed less effective for their leadership skills and their loyalty and their cooperation, etc. And what the study found was that these ratings weren't based on reality, but on human bias. That we make assumptions about a positive or a negative quality and generalize these across all areas. And this became known as the halo effect. And by our sort of very nature as humans, someone who is sort of more attractive to us, and this is typically in a physical sense, is often assumed to possess other positive qualities. And look, this is probably quite a sad indictment of us as humans. And it might have you thinking that maybe you should go on that sort of crash diet or become more vain or focus on your appearance to get ahead. But for me, this isn't the important part of what the study shows. What I think is most important is how this affects our flawed judgment by comparison. There is a tendency to see someone who is slim or attractive, if you're a guy, someone who's really built, and make a whole lot of assumptions. We assume that they have the perfect partner, that they have a great job, that they have a nice house, that they're happy in their body and in their life, that they feel respected. We make assumptions that if we could just get their physical attractiveness qualities for ourselves, that life would be so much better. But how false this is in reality. And I work with so many women who have sort of the perfect body by society standards, who have the halo effect working clearly in their favor, but who are anything but satisfied. They aren't happy with their body. They struggle in their relationships because of it. They don't feel confident. They don't feel respected. Comparing yourself to others is kind of one of the most surefire ways to make yourself feel bad. And it's because we typically compare ourselves to those who are better than us or people that we believe are better than us. And part of the problem with this is that you compare yourself to someone's front of house without sort of seeing all the crap that's going on behind the scenes. You don't see their struggles, their ups and downs, their day-to-day pain that they're going through. You just see the good stuff. So what you're doing is you're comparing your behind the scenes, your messiness with their front of house, and you're feeling that they have it so much better. And you're really comparing what you believe is going on with what you're really experiencing. And I just don't think that this is a great place to be in, and you kind of really think that it's much better than it genuinely is. And the other thing with this is that things are always relative. And so I just finished reading Tony Robbins' book called Money. In it, he interviews some of the most successful investors of all time, people who are worth billions with a B. And when he asked these people, do they still worry about money? Nearly all of them said yes. So how can this be? How can you have 3 billion or 15 billion in the bank and still worry about money? It's because things are always relative. And as the amount of money came in and increased, what they wanted to do with it also increased. And nearly all of the people that he interviewed now dedicate sort of large parts of their life to philanthropy. And some have even agreed to give away everything they're worth when they die. And so their worry about money isn't probably the usual stuff that you have to deal with, which is, how am I going to pay the mortgage? Or I'd love to go on a holiday, but I just can't afford it. It's worrying about the fact that they want to have enough money to be able to preserve a whole section of a rainforest, or they want to be able to eradicate some disease in a whole section of Africa, and they need to have enough money to do it. So why is this stuff important? Because things are always relative. Have you kind of ever had that experience when you get a pay rise and it feels like a decent amount, but within 2 months you're back to living in your overdraft and thinking you need more money come in? You've adjusted your life because of the new money, and pretty shortly this is the new norm. And once again, you wish that you could just have another pay increase. Well, the same thing happens with your body. People think if they can just lose 5 kilos, then I'll be happy. They do it and they may then be momentarily happy. But then they find something else. Maybe they now want to lose another 2 kilos. Maybe they want to do something to get rid of that cellulite on their legs, or they notice how much they don't like their stomach. That no matter what is changed, there's always something else that you can then be unsatisfied about. And what this means is you need to be happy and okay with where you are right now. Regardless of where that is, you have to be happy and confident in your own skin. And this is because, as I said, things are always relative. When you lose weight, there's always more weight that you could lose. When you get tone, there's always more tone that you could be. Your goalposts continue to move as you make improvements. But sort of changing the mindset to be happy with now instead of waiting until you reach the goal is the best way of dealing with this. And people are very resistant to this. They feel that they don't want to feel good about where they are now because otherwise they won't make improvements, that they'll just stay where they're at. And I honestly don't think this is the case. Being happy with where you are and wanting to make improvements aren't mutually exclusive. You don't have to be miserable to make changes. And being happy and making improvements just leads to more happiness. Being unhappy and, say, needing to lose weight to make yourself happy may lead to temporary happiness, but it also leads to fear. Fear that the weight won't stay off and you'll return to being unhappy. And it's hard to be kind of truly happy when your day-to-day thoughts are dictated by this kind of worry. But unfortunately, this is where a lot of people find themselves. So the next thing I want to look at is what I call the Biggest Loser syndrome. And The Biggest Loser is a TV show that first premiered in 2004. It's a show that sort of takes obese people and has them compete against one another to see who can lose the most weight. The contestants do excruciating amounts of training each day while eating a very calorie restricted diet. It's the kind of car crash TV that I can't stand. And more than just being bad, it has a real impact on the beliefs of the people who are watching it, about losing weight, about exercise, about dieting. And I want to touch on a number of these sort of false ideas or myths that it promotes. But be aware that these are ideas that people typically already believe. So regardless of whether you watch The Biggest Loser or not, and I honestly implore you not to, these false ideas really need to be addressed. So the first myth is that the number on the scale is most important. The contestants are weighed at the end of each show to see how much they've lost during that week. And this is probably similar to someone who goes on a new diet, and at the end of the week, they hop on the scale to see if it's working. Scale weight is a terrible judge of health. You can be overweight and even obese and still be metabolically healthy, just as someone can be an ideal weight and be incredibly unhealthy. You can have three people who are the exact same height, who are the exact same weight, but who have distinctly different physiques and totally different health levels. Unfortunately, when you use scale as your sort of yardstick and your sole yardstick, as so many people do, it doesn't allow for any of these differences. Challenging this belief is sort of especially important when people are starting out the healing process and sort of giving their body what it needs. The majority of my clients and also people I sort of regularly communicate with are people who have been sort of restricting food intake in one way or another through just kind of dieting or doing something more extreme. And they're often exercising a lot and often to the point where it's not so healthy anymore. And I know that we're constantly bombarded with kind of the idea that people are overweight because they're eating lots of junk food and no one's doing exercise, but that's just not the people that I'm typically seeing. And so in the beginning with these kind of people, as they're eating more to support their body, it's going to mean that they're going to put on weight. And while in their mind, they may think all this weight is just fat, this is definitely not the case. And also in their mind, they may think weight gain, this is not good for my health. But again, this is not true. So apart from fat, let's look at the reason why someone could gain weight and why I think this is important. So the first part of the weight gain comes from glycogen. So some of this is when you eat carbohydrates, some of it is used for energy immediately, and some is stored for quick energy later on, which is known as glycogen. And this is stored in your muscles and in your liver to be called on between meals and in an emergency. If you're under eating, your ability to actually store glycogen is really decreased and limited. But as you start to eat more, you start to increase more glycogen. And this is really important because it leads to more stable moods, more stable energy, and increased ability to handle stress. So part of the reason why people would put on weight is this increased glycogen. The next is through increased water weight. And when someone's been under eating, their body hasn't been able to repair as well as it should have. So part of this water weight is due to cellular repair and the inflammatory process within the body to help heal. And you may not want this, but it's how your body is kind of rebuilding healthy tissues. So this is another reason why people can put on weight. The next one is organs. Some of the increased weight will be due to the body rebuilding organ tissue. When you're under eating, the body has to make up for energy shortages somehow. It becomes catabolic and will start to break down your organs so they can be used for energy. So by increasing food intake, the body starts to rebuild these organs, and this can add to the weight. In the same way, lean tissue and muscle. So in the same way as you broke down organs when you weren't eating enough, your body does the same thing with your lean tissue and muscle. And when you begin taking inadequate calories, the lost tissue can be rebuilt, and this adds to the weight scale. So if you're solely looking at scale weight, then all of these important processes are going to be seen as negative and make you think that what you're doing is incorrect. But in fact, they're really essential to recovery and improved health, and are a natural part of healing. So the next myth is that weight loss should be rapid. And this follows on from the last idea that sort of weight loss is the most important thing. And if you're going to lose weight, why do it slowly when you can do it fast? And so over a period of roughly 6 months, the winner of The Biggest Loser, they're losing anywhere between 40 to 50% of their body weight. And yes, these people are big to start with, but this kind of weight loss is just insane. So Rachel Fredrickson, who you can see on the screen here, was the winner of season 15. And she ended up losing 59.6% of her body weight and ended up the show with a BMI of 18, which is technically actually underweight. She lost 155 pounds or 70 kilos and finished the show weighing 105 pounds or 47 kilos. So she actually finished the show as a size 0. And people are dropping huge amounts of weight each week. And so the highest amount for a man was 41 pounds or 18 kilos in a week. And for a woman, it was 23 pounds or kilos in a week. And look, I don't care how big you are. Like, to lose that kind of weight in a week is just an inordinate amount. And the problem with this is people get the idea in their head this is what should happen when you start a new diet or you do exercising, that weight should just drop off. And when it doesn't, they either kind of give up or they decide that they need to really sort of ramp it up a notch. The problem being with this is none of this is focusing on health or on long-term sustainability of actually keeping weight off. Honestly, losing weight is the easy part. Keeping it off is what's difficult. And forcing it off in a manner like this teaches you nothing about healthy habits or your relationship with food or why the weight went on in the first place. At some point, you can't keep up these kinds of strenuous routines and you go back to your old habits. And so managing expectations is something I'm really big on. And because your expectations dictate what results you'll be happy with, it's important to have the right beliefs and expectations about what should happen with weight loss. And if it means that you have beliefs, or if you do have beliefs that it should be rapid, you're likely to be either A, disappointed, or B, taking things to such an extreme level to achieve your results that it's going to have a negative impact. And you'll probably be doing this all under the guise of thinking that it's healthy, because as most people think, less weight equals more health. And unfortunately, that's just not true. So the next myth that The Biggest Loser perpetuates is that it has to be painful, that exercise has to be extreme and you should be pushing yourself to your limits, the kind of no pain, no gain mentality, the kind of nonsense that you see on the Fitspiration type memes like I've got on the screen here, that like puking and blood and pain, that they're all good and they're acceptable and that's what you should be doing if you're exercising, and it's just not true at all. And the same with the diet side of things, that the diet has to be totally restrictive in calories, that it has to be a chore, and that if you're enjoying your food, that it just can't be healthy, that your diet needs to be kind of misery inducing, otherwise you're obviously not restricting enough. And these are ideas that people kind of have when I speak to them, and it's as if their exercise routines and their restrictive diets are this badge of honor. In essence, they're saying like, look at me, look what I can put myself through. I must really care about my body to put myself through hell every day. And in reality, it just couldn't be further from the truth. And if you're living like this, it's just really setting yourself up for failure, because we all have a finite amount of willpower. It's part of the reason why they put chocolate bars at tills in supermarkets. After doing your shopping and making lots of decisions and deciding not to eat lots of unhealthy options, your willpower gets worn down. And having something like this at the counter provides the best opportunity for people to be in the weakened state so they actually buy them. If you're having to use willpower every day, for every meal, for every exercise routine, then you can only keep it up for so long. But if you're genuinely enjoying the healthy food you're eating, if you look forward to exercise because you find it fun, then it's much easier to keep up. And this may mean that in the beginning you make changes more slowly, but you do it in a manner that they become natural and that things are no longer requiring willpower for you to follow through on them. And then you can add in a couple more changes. You compare this to then the idea that diets and exercise should be hard and unpleasant, and what happens? You're always then having to push yourself to the extreme, or it feels like you're not making a difference. You don't allow yourself to enjoy it because it then feels like you're not trying hard enough and that you're not going to get results. And this just isn't a great place to be in. And the other side of the myth is that it really prevents people from even starting. They watch a show where people are training to the point of puking or eating meals kind of fit for rabbits, and they're thinking, if this is what I need to do to get healthy or lose weight, then screw it. Like, I prefer to stay the way I am. Like, if this is what it takes, I don't want it. And this is really sad because it's just not true. It's very doable to improve your health and eat a diet and enjoy exercise and all of that in an enjoyable and moderate fashion. It doesn't have to be painful. And the final myth is that you have to become a sort of social pariah and shut yourself off from friends and from social occasions and society in general to be healthy. And the Biggest Loser contestants, they start off the show in a ranch for the first couple of months. They're not allowed to watch TV, to read a newspaper, to have much contact with the outside world. One former contestant revealed that he got to speak to his partner for 5 minutes on 3 occasions over a 4.5-month period. He's also quoted as saying, "It's very similar to being in prison, except the inmates are fatter." And again, this is an idea that so many people have. People waiting to make changes until there's like this perfect time in their life where there's no social engagements, there's no weddings, when they're not going away, when they can wall themselves off and make this their only focus. But this just isn't realistic. Anyone can make changes when they remove everything from their life. But in reality, it teaches you very little about what happens in real life situations. And yes, you need to be able to make time for changes and prioritize things, but it still has to fit into your life. You can't live in a vacuum and then kind of make these changes and then think that those old habits aren't going to come back when you expose yourself to the real world. And this is actually something that's kind of a double-edged sword, where people need to kind of find that balance between sort of food being important enough that people actually follow through, but not so important that it becomes all-consuming. And when working with people with eating issues, this is usually something we spend time looking at. For a lot of people with these problems, their food obsessions have overtaken their lives. So friends and social situations have fallen by the wayside. They have a long list of hobbies that they used to do that is now a distant memory. Food has become sort of all-consuming to the detriment of the rest of their life. So in these situations, a big component is bringing these areas back into their life. When the only thing that someone has in their life is thinking about food, it's hard for them to let go of this. But if you can be bringing back in other experiences so they can remember what it was like to enjoy this stuff, it becomes much easier. You want to give life a purpose, and a purpose outside of eating and outside of food. And then it makes it much easier over time for people to make changes. So shutting yourself off from society isn't necessary to be healthy. And when people take it to the extreme, it can actually lead to a whole host of negatives. So don't wait for the perfect time, because it never exists. Just start in an imperfect fashion and do what you can manage. So this ends this little section on the Biggest Loser syndrome and sort of the myths that have kind of it's helped to spread, or at least to solidify in people's minds. So I now want to just give you some further ideas to help with your thinking around food. So the first idea is that you want to start to think like a naturally slim person. And In fact, weight doesn't really matter about this one so much. And this could sort of equally read, learn to think like someone who, say, has a stable weight, they're happy with their weight, and they spend little time worrying about food. But that's kind of a mouthful. So I just stuck with think like a naturally slim person. But let me tell you about the idea and sort of where I kind of discovered it and what it means. So, as I've mentioned a number of times, I work with people often who have issues with food, and regularly people who spent time in clinics for eating disorders. And in these clinics, a lot of the time, the focus is on getting these people to eat more. So they're following a 2,500 calorie a day diet or a 3,000 calorie a day diet or whatever it may be. And while in the clinic, they keep it up and they start to put weight back on. At some point, they hit a normal weight and they go back into the real world. And it's not just in clinic settings. Often these people of their own accord will have times where they realize that they need to eat more. So they create their own routine, they eat more, they put on sort of much needed weight. And from a food perspective, they are eating in a more normal fashion. Most people would even think that they're doing better. But there's an important feature that needs to be changed for this to stick. And this is the mental side of things. Because it's one thing to eat 2,000 calories a day and enjoy the experience, finishing a meal and then barely giving it another thought until it's time to eat again. It's something totally different to eat 2,000 calories a day and sort of hate every moment of it, to be wishing you could get back to your restricting ways, to be eating in your ritualistic nature, and to have that kind of control that you so badly crave. So when I say I want someone to think like a naturally slim person, this is exactly what I'm getting at. Someone who's naturally slim, who can eat a whole pizza and sort of think nothing of it. At the next meal, they eat less, but this is a kind of unconscious decision, and it just happens because they're not as hungry. Or they have sort of a massive piece of cake in the afternoon and have sort of forgotten about it as soon as they've eaten it. And this is in contrast to someone who does that and then spends the next 3 or 4 hours sort of agonizing over why they ate the cake and what gym class they're going to go to tonight and how long do I think it's going to take for me to burn off those calories. And just eating a certain way doesn't guarantee that the mind will get on board and appreciate the change. This is something separate and it needs to be dealt with specifically. Doing exercises like the ones I suggested earlier on and looking at your beliefs and changing your environment are all really helpful. But you need to realize that there's a difference between changing what you eat and changing how you think about what you eat. And I know in this example, I've sort of talked about people who have eating disorders, but it doesn't even have to be that extreme. I work with lots of people who just have issues around food, and the idea of having a piece of cake or having a chocolate or that something fairly innocuous can really take up a lot of their thoughts. And so starting to think like someone who's naturally slim is the thing that I suggest that they start doing. And this kind of leads on to the next tip, which is getting out of the thinking that a new diet is going to save you. And this is true for nearly everyone. But again, I think it's especially important for those with sort of body image issues and have a relationship with food issues. I speak to so many people who sort of battle with dieting for so long. And instead of looking at their thinking patterns or their beliefs, they just go from diet to diet. Their thinking is that once they get or they find that right diet, that everything will just fall away, that they'll feel confident, that their symptoms will disappear, that they'll no longer worry about food because they'll just have this perfect plan to follow. And as strongly as these people believe that this is going to be the case, it's a mirage, because no diet is going to be able to fix what these people are really after, because it's not about food. People who are pinning so much of their sort of disappointments and worries and troubles on their diet when these issues actually have nothing to do with food. And look, please don't get me wrong. There are going to be ways of eating that are better or worse at supporting you. And this just goes without saying. But putting all your focus on what you eat isn't going to change the mental situation and the beliefs that are driving these issues. And these need to be sort of looked at separately, and the mental emotional side of things needs to be worked on. And this is kind of leads on to sort of the next suggestion, which is people need to learn to deal with emotions in a non-food way. And this doesn't have to be all the time. And no matter who you are, there are going to be some times where you eat for emotional reasons. So you say, had a busy week at work, and you get yourself a takeaway and you eat it and relax on the couch at night. Or you're feeling a bit low, and so you cheer yourself up by watching a Seinfeld marathon and eating some chocolate. And these are all sort of relatively normal behaviors, and they aren't an issue. It becomes an issue when these become someone's default mechanism for dealing with their emotional issues, where it's a regular or even a daily affair. And just as not everyone who uses alcohol is an alcoholic, using food to deal with emotions isn't always a problem. But it is when it's done regularly, and it's what sort of the only thing that someone has. And so Scott Abel is someone who I really respect for his work on dealing with eating issues. And he has identified sort of 5 mood states that people can get into where they then use food to deal with their emotions. And so the first one is using false highs or feelings of entitlement for having an indulgence, as in, I deserve this. And justifying why you do or you don't deserve food is really a slippery slope. You then have unnecessary lows that you then bring upon yourself, as in, I'm alone and no one cares for me. And the only means to then relieve that anxiety is sort of a food indulgence or a food deprivation to change your experience. The next mood state is numbness, where people have just too much stress from too many different sources, and it overwhelms them, and it sort of alienates them in their connection with themselves. So by having a food indulgence or by kind of depriving themselves of food, it serves as kind of like a mute button, so they don't have to deal with what's going on. The next is sort of emotional avoidance. So when someone's got sort of deep or intense emotions and they're just kind of too intense for them to face, or they're feeling so hurt. And by, again, having a sort of food indulgence or avoiding food is sort of an external solution to soothe their soul. But unfortunately, with this one, it can often do the opposite. And once people finish their eating or they finish that situation, it adds to that kind of emotional torment. And the final mood state is sort of emotional confusion. And this is when you sort of are lost ability to properly label an emotion. And because you can't label it appropriately and you just don't know what's going on and why you're feeling the way you are, you're not able to let go of it. And in this case, by having some food or avoiding some food, it sort of simplifies this and gives you something else to focus on. And the thinking here that needs to change is that using food as a means to change these mood states is a viable solution. And as I said earlier, we'll all deal with mood states with food at some point. But for too many people, this is their main crutch. This is all they have. And rather than having something that's like dramatic or a really tough time that kind of sets this off, it can become a habitual occurrence. And every day becomes an emotional state that needs food to soothe it. And when people get into this situation, then it's not a good place to be in. And to be honest with you, with this, food is not the answer, but it's also not the person's real issue. It's a coping mechanism for dealing with their emotions. And just making that shift to realize it's not about the food is a really important first step with it. But if this is one of the ways that you deal with emotions and this is the kind of your thinking process, then I really suggest that it's something you look at changing. So the final belief that I want to challenge is that fear is a good motivator. And this is a common one that I see, especially when people are wanting to make aesthetic changes. So they focus on how unhappy they are in their body and they create a sense of fear that this is going to go on unless they make changes. And this then becomes the impetus for eating better or going to the gym or whatever it may be. And the problem with this is that while I think fear can be an effective motivator, this only works in the short term. So it might help you get to the gym for a couple of weeks, or it might help you eat better for a little while. It might even help you outrun a shark. But over the long haul, it just doesn't last. And there was a report from Canada in 2014 that was about heart attacks and stroke survivors that really shows this perfectly. So having a stroke or a heart attack is a pretty major event. And in the majority of cases, diet and lifestyle habits are a contributing factor, if not sort of a major factor, for why someone has had one of these events. And this is the kind of thing that would expect to kind of give you a wake up call if you survived. Something that would kind of make you reassess your life and think you need to make a change. And this is what the Canadian report showed, with 6 in 10 survivors even equating it to being given a second chance at life and saying that they were no longer taking their health for granted. But what is interesting is that when it came to making changes, more than 50% couldn't maintain it or didn't even try it at all. And this is how most people approach sort of dieting or making a lifestyle change. Something happens that induces a sense of fear or worry or negativity. You realize you put on some weight and you can't fit into a certain dress or a pair of jeans. You decide that this is it. This is going to be your time to make a change. So week 1 is easy. Week 2, not so bad either. But as time goes on, the tougher it gets. The fear that you had on that initial day slowly starts to lose its power as you don't get the results as fast as you're after. You were sort of so determined, but it just now starts to seem like a lot of hard work. And so it becomes more and more likely that you're going to chuck in the towel. Because as I said, fear is a great motivator in the very short term, but not in the long term. And the other reason for this is that fear is not a nice place to be in each day. Fear isn't fun. Having to be fearful every day to get you to go do exercise or get you to eat well is tiresome. At some point, you want to cheer yourself up and take away the fear. If you're so inclined, this could be to eat some of your sort of favorite unhealthy foods, and sort of before you know it, you're on your 3rd day of eating chocolate and sweets at every snack and lying on the sofa watching marathons on Netflix. And rather than fear, you need to find positive reasons to make changes that pull you towards them. Things that excite you and that you enjoy, things that don't require willpower to keep them up, but are just part of your life. And making this shift is sort of huge. And it's the common feature that clients have when we finish up working together. Like in the beginning, they're following my advice, and maybe it feels like a little bit of work and a lot of organization. But by the end of it, they're doing it on autopilot. They don't need to convince themselves that they want to keep it up. They're feeling better, so they just enjoy the new routine. And they often start out with a lot of fear, and they used to carry this around every day, but this is gone and they're more relaxed. But despite the fact that they don't have this fear, they're still able to keep up these new habits. And this is how you create sort of long-term success with health, and this is how it's achieved. So that brings to a close the content for today's webinar, and I hope you found this information useful. I know some of this may seem a little sort of ethereal or up in the clouds, but I really believe this stuff is really important. More and more with clients, it's the stuff that they start to focus on, because once you can unlock this part, then the food and the exercise stuff, it's really important. Like these are the things that are the barriers that stop you from doing what you're doing and stop you from being able to listen to your body. And so by getting rid of this stuff, it just makes things so much easier. So the final thing I want to mention is a promotion that I have on at the moment. I'm offering people the chance to have a free consult with me where we put together a plan to improve your health. We'll look at what you're to have going on at the moment, what your symptoms are, how you're living and eating, and sort of where you want to get to. And based on this, we'll put together a plan for how to get there and what you should be sort of focusing on. So why am I doing this and why am I offering these sessions? Well, there's 3 main reasons. One is like, I hate seeing the suffering, the diet misery that people put themselves through. Everywhere I turn, people are kind of following extreme practices that are sort of ruining their health, that are destroying their relationship with food, and is just sort of worsening their body image. And my focus is that I want to kind of bring an end to this suffering, and these sort of one-on-one sessions are a great way of doing this. Number two is that I'm good at this stuff and I really enjoy doing it. It's one thing to know lots of information, and it's another to be able to put it into practice in the real world with real people. I read so many books and health blogs and listen to podcasts, and in a pretty short space of time, I can tell whether the person I'm listening to or reading actually works with clients or not. And I can tell how successful they're going to be. I work with clients day in and day out and have really honed my skills based on my experiences, not just theories. And this means that when I chat with someone, I can explain why things are going on or give them practical suggestions for what to do and tell them why I'm recommending this. And people find this information really valuable, and I really enjoy being able to do this with people. And the third reason is it's how I get clients. A lot of the times when I explain the plan to people, they tell me that they want help putting it into practice. They want to have someone that they're accountable to. They want an assistant that lasts more than one session, that from our chat together, they see the value of having me there to guide them through it. And let me just say that like this free consult isn't just a sales pitch in disguise. I've had that happen to me and it really sucks. Like people say that I'm going to give you this plan, you then get on the end of the phone and they then don't provide you with any real information, and they're just trying to sell you something, and it's just not cool. And I will provide you with real information and real value that you can then be implementing straight away so that you can be getting the results that you're after. I explain sort of why you're getting your different symptoms and how they're all interconnected. I explain what sort of foods and meal structure are going to be best to support you. I break this down and sort of explain sort of what's most important to change first and why. I opened my doors to new clients just over a month ago. Because of how I work with people, I limit the number of clients I work with to sort of 20 to 22 people. And once these slots fill up, I close my doors again, and I won't be taking on new clients again until the middle of the year. As of tonight, I have 7 slots left, with 3 of these planning sessions booked in for tomorrow already. And I hope that these remaining slots will be filled up in the next couple of weeks, maybe the next month at the absolute maximum. And once these slots are gone, then I'm going to stop doing these free sessions that I'm offering at the moment. And look, these free sessions aren't for everyone. I want to be chatting with people who are motivated and who are ready and who are wanting to take action. So if you've liked what I've talked about today and think that you could benefit from a chat, then please send me an email to the address here. I was going to put in a web address, but unfortunately I've had some issues with my website about an hour before jumping on this webinar. When it rains, it pours. So anyway, if you can send me an email there, I will then be able to send you a letter that details exactly what happens as part of this process and what you need to do and how you can apply. And just to be clear, this is open no matter where you are in the world. So while I'm based in the UK, over 50% of my clients are in other parts of the world. And I have lots of clients in the US and in Australia and dot around parts of Europe. So it doesn't have to be someone who's just UK based. The consults are going to be done via Skype or FaceTime. So we can work out the time difference and make it work. And while today's webinar has been all about sort of beliefs and thinking around health, this isn't the only thing I can help people with. So if you have anything going on with your health, whether it be problems with your cycle or digestion or anything that you would normally think about, oh, I should probably see a nutritionist about, then get in contact. And even if you're someone who's already healthy and you think, you know what, I could just want to take it somewhere even better, then you can please apply. So as I said, send an email to that address and then I can send you the information about it. And I know this isn't going to be for everyone, but if you do want to take action and you'd like some personal help, then just send me an email and we can go from there. So that's it from today's webinar. I thoroughly enjoyed putting this together for you, and I really love talking about this stuff. And I really thank you for spending your time with me. I know how valuable it is. And if there's one take-home message I hope you get from today, it's that your beliefs are incredibly important for improving your health. There is no food or exercise routine that can save you if your beliefs aren't supporting your endeavors. So really learn what your beliefs are, and if you need to be changing them, then follow some of the suggestions I gave you. So I wish you all the best and hope to catch up with you soon, either in person or on a call or on another webinar. So enjoy the rest of your day or night wherever you are in the world, and take care.